Hi, I'm Mike Bowler. I'm a longtime Agile coach. Started my journey back in 1999 with XP, have done Scrum, Kanban, etc. But that's not really why I'm here today. I'm here today to talk more about some of the psychological things. Because about 9 or 10 years ago, I decided that of all the things I did as a coach, my weakest area was all this interesting people stuff. So that's taken me on a crazy journey into neuroscience, psychology, hypnosis, body language, graphology, and a bunch of other things. And I expect to ramble through a whole bunch of those today.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Agile for Agilists Podcast, the series made by Agile enthusiasts for Agile enthusiasts. And now for your hosts, Drew Podwal and Brad Nelson.
Hey Agilists, Brad here. Like Mike mentioned in his intro, we've got a packed and occasionally tangential conversation today on psychological safety, explored through the lenses of neuroscience and psychology. Now, quick disclaimer, while we've all got some experience and training in these areas, none of us are medical professionals, so consider this episode informational and conversational, not clinical advice. That said, we hope you find it not only insightful, but maybe even a little entertaining. Alright, enough from me, let's hand it off to Drew.
All right, so psychological safety.
Yes.
Where do we want to start with that? Because there's so many places to dig in.
There really is. When we talk a lot about psychological safety in the industry, but we tend to talk in platitudes. We say it's good, do more of it. And that's not helpful to anybody. That doesn't give us any concrete, actionable steps that we can take to either understand why it's important or what we would do to improve it. And so I like to talk about the actual neuroscience of it. But even before we get into the neuroscience, let's just frame the context a little bit, because there are three different lenses through which we could look at psychological safety. And I've chosen the neuroscience perspective, but it's worthwhile looking at what the other two are as well. If we look at the work that Amy Edmondson did, she was very specifically researching a specific behavior that she saw. She saw that when people felt psychologically safe, they would speak up when they saw problems. She was studying medical studies, and she found that counterintuitively, that the medical groups that had the most errors were actually the best ones, or the ones that admitted to the most errors were the best ones, and the ones that didn't seem to have many errors were actually the worst. And it was because the ones that admitted all of the errors were psychologically safe enough to admit that, and they were learning from that, and they were improving and getting better. The other ones were making just as many mistakes, but they weren't admitting to it. So nobody knew about it. They were concealing their mistakes, and that was the problem. So what Amy Edmondson looked at was this whole specific behavior of people speaking up when they felt comfortable enough. But if we generalize that more a little bit to psychology, it's more about feeling safe to be who you are. Not just about speaking up, it's not just a behavior, but it's, are you feeling safe in this environment to express yourself as you truly are? Then the third perspective, which is where I spend most of my time, is on the neuroscience. And the neuroscience definition of psychological safety is very specifically a state where we have access to the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is that part of your brain at the front that controls your higher level rational thinking. So when we want to be at our absolute best, particularly in an IT space, when we want to be at our best, we need our highest level rational thinking active. And when we're feeling psychologically unsafe, by definition, we don't have full access to it. Now, it might be completely shut down, it might only be partially inhibited, but the point is that if we have safety, we're in a good place with our prefrontal cortex, and if we are lacking psychological safety, we do not. So what that means from practical purposes is that it's not just that we feel uncomfortable speaking up, we are actually incapable of doing a lot of the thinking that would result in the speaking up. So we're not thinking at our best. A part of our brain is a very key, important part of our brain is actually shut down. That's also the part of the brain that manages to override emotional reactions. So if I'm in a situation where I'm feeling uncomfortable for a variety of reasons, the prefrontal cortex, when it's active, can shut that feeling down so that we can still operate in a good way. Whereas if I have lost access to my prefrontal cortex, or at least had it inhibited, I'm responding more poorly to the situations around me. So I might be more easily angered, I might be more easily influenced by emotional states than I would be if I had full access to my prefrontal cortex.
Let me break in there because I have a question about that.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. If I'm understanding it correctly, let me repeat it back to you because I don't know This is not an area, like I've never studied psychological safety from this angle before. So I'm really fascinated by it. But it sounds like what you said is that when your prefrontal cortex is not blocked, I forget exactly the word that you said it.
When it's fully enabled.
Fully enabled, right? That if you were having other feelings of insecurity, that your prefrontal cortex being fully enabled is what allows you to then maybe talk yourself down from the ledge on those other feelings.
Yes.
That's really fascinating to me. That I never even considered that.
Yeah, we rely so heavily on the prefrontal cortex for a lot of things. So when it's inhibited, when we don't feel that safety, it has all kinds of ripple effects.
Gotcha. And so when it's inhibited, what area of the brain are you typically like? Is it elevated elsewhere? Like,
well, yeah, we're working purely on a reactive state. So all the other parts of your brain are still active, but we are reacting rather than being proactive.
Okay, that's really okay. So this is really interesting because, like, this is something that's like really front and center with where I am right now, and I never actually. I do notice that we tend to be reactive, right, as opposed to being more strategic.
Yes.
And it's more comfortable for everybody. And we also don't have great psychological safety at times. So, like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Did we get behind the eight ball on things and, first, and that's why we're being reactive, or?
And it is all deeply interrelated. Some of the things that we need to do to build up the psychological safety or to build up access to the prefrontal cortex, I mean, it all loops around that the more access we have to the prefrontal cortex, the easier it is to stay there. But once we slide down the slope, it becomes harder and harder to bring things back again. But there are concrete steps that I'll get to in just a moment of things that we can do to build up psychological safety.
I'm going to pass it back to you then.
Okay. So there's a couple of different models that we can introduce. So let me start with the one that's a little bit more nebulous, first of all. That's polyvagal theory. And polyvagal theory, we'll get to the more concrete, actionable one in a moment, but polyvagal theory is good context. It has 3 different colored states that we talk through as we're talking about safety. And when we're in the green state, this is the place where we feel truly safe. We have full access to our prefrontal cortex. We're feeling calm and relaxed. It's often called rest and digest. And we're in this state, everything is operating well, we're thinking clearly, we're able to respond clearly and analytically to the situations around us. When we are exposed to some danger, one of our 2 survival mechanisms will activate, because we do have 2 that come from different states. The first one is the mammalian system that is common to all mammals. And this is our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system that works together. So when we experience something that could be a danger, so for example, I'll give you a situation. Last summer, I was sitting in my backyard working on my laptop, and around the corner came a bear. Now, a bear is not common in my neighborhood. We have a lot of them in the area, but having one in my backyard is not a typical experience. So this bear came around the corner. All of a sudden, I went into the yellow state in polyvagal theory. My sympathetic nervous system activated. It started to bring blood inwards from my extremities. It started to accelerate my heart rate. My adrenaline started to flow. Noradrenaline started going in my brain. All of these things preparing me for fight or flight, because the yellow in polyvagal theory is fight or flight. So it's doing all of these things, and one of the interesting things that it does is it shuts down non-essential services, because fight or flight is so energy intensive that we need to shut down everything that is not critical in that moment. So growth stops. Your fingernails stop growing. Your hair stops growing. But for our purposes here, the most important thing that it shuts down is the prefrontal cortex. So now we're in this state of yellow, of fight or flight, and our brain says, I need all of the energy that would have gone to the prefrontal cortex. So boom, it gets shut off so that we can now operate and do fight or flight. Now, had that danger been even more severe, had that bear got really close to me, it didn't, thankfully. But had that bear really come up on the deck and come towards me, I would have moved into the next state, which is red in the polyvagal model. And that is our older survival mechanism. And that's where I would have gone into a complete freeze response. So you've heard of fight, flight, and freeze. Freeze is the really ancient response that's common to all animals, reptiles and such. And fight or flight is the mammalian response. But either one of them inhibits the prefrontal cortex. Had I gone into red, it would have inhibited by actually cutting off blood flow to my brain, because when we're in that full freeze response, we actually stop breathing. And stopping breathing cuts off the oxygen to my brain, which means that my prefrontal cortex is inhibited. So two completely different reasons why it might shut down, but either one of those responses, the yellow or the red, puts us into a state where our prefrontal cortex is down. We're no longer psychologically safe. Now, when we're talking about safety in the workplace, we're only talking about yellow. We're never going into the red because we're not that dire.
Hopefully.
But it's worth understanding the three states, the green, yellow, and red in the polyvagal theory. But again, that was a little bit more nebulous.
So I like to use a lot of my military background for analogies, but like we used to drill over and over and over again. And when we're done drilling, we would do it again. The more familiar you are with the tools that you have around you, is that what would determine?
The less you need the prefrontal cortex to operate those things.
Okay.
So when you have drilled something into complete muscle memory, now you can do those things when you're reacting. And that's the essence of it. You can do those things even when you're, when we're in a high stress situation, we fall back to our level of conditioning or level of training. It's because that training is how we react.
Gotcha.
Because I've lost all ability to be proactive.
If you had more experiences sitting in your backyard with the bears passing through and whatnot, would that be similar to drilling over and over again, or?
Well, in this case, I knew what to do because bear encounters are not rare for me. It happens 3 or 4 times a year. I'm used to having bear encounters. I'm not used to having one in my backyard.
Gotcha.
So there's a difference, because normally when I encounter a bear on the trail, I've got bear spray with me. I've got equipment. I'm prepared. I was not prepared sitting with a laptop on my backyard.
Yeah, I don't own bear spray. I own a lot of weird things, but I don't own bear spray.
Well, I live in a place where bear spray is sort of required when you're hiking.
Very cool.
But anyway, moving back to psychological safety. The next model I typically introduce is the safety model that comes from the Academy of Brain-Based Leadership. It's an acronym. SAFETY spells out, obviously, the 5 key things that we care about, plus a catch-all at the end. So the S in safety is security. And security is our ability to anticipate what's going to happen around us. From an evolutionary perspective, we have evolved to be tremendous prediction engines, because it turns out that in order for our ancestors to survive, it was not enough for us to be able to react to a danger around us. We needed to be able to anticipate a danger around us. So we've become these astounding prediction engines, being able to see dangers in all different places all around us and anticipate what's coming. When we feel that we're in a situation where we cannot anticipate what's going on, we feel less safe, because this is what we've evolved for. So if I'm in a work environment and I don't know if I'm going to be fired tomorrow, or I don't know if the work is changing on a regular basis, or I don't know who I'm reporting to, or what the work is going to be from day to day, and I feel all that uncertainty and I can't predict what's going on, I feel less safe. So that's part of the S. We need to have consistency. This is why humans like rituals, routines, because they make us feel safer. So we want to have all of those things in our life to be able to predict what's coming. We don't have to predict everything, but we have to have some sense of what's coming. And if we're completely uncertain, do I even have a job tomorrow? I feel less safe.
The way that I always describe psychological safety is that having a high degree of psychological safety enables us to take the kinds of risks that our leadership needs us to be able to take in order to compete and thrive in the modern age of business. But it's really, really fascinating hearing it from actually what's going on chemistry-wise. So,
yeah.
Okay, so the next one is in the safety model is A. A is for autonomy. So S was security. A is autonomy. And this is that we need to feel that we can control the environment around us, that we can make decisions for ourselves. So in a team environment, it might be that the team is able to decide their own process. The team's able to work their own board, do their own work, figure out what's going on. We'll never have 100% autonomy because there's always laws, there's rules, there's regulations, there's restrictions around us. We have to cooperate with other teams. But we need to have the ability to make decisions for ourselves. So if you've got a work environment where the boss comes in and says, I'm not just going to tell you what you have to do, I'm going to tell you how you're going to do it, all of a sudden we're losing psychological safety because we no longer have that autonomy. So we don't want to be told what to do. We intrinsically push back on that. Now you might be thinking right away, but we all know that one person who just wants to be told what to do. And the reality is that those people have a lack of security, the first S.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they knew enough about what was going on in their environment, then they would need autonomy. But if they are feeling completely uncertain, they want to be told what to do so that that gives them the security, first of all, on top of which we have to layer autonomy. So it seems a little bit counterintuitive, but we all do need autonomy, and we will push back at a psychological level if we don't feel that we have enough of it.
Yeah.
So then moving on to the next letter, which is F in safety, and the F is fairness. We need to have a sense of fairness of what's going on around us. And the interesting thing is that fairness doesn't have to directly affect me. It's not that you have been unfair to me. If I see the two of you being unfair to each other, then that triggers a response in me, and I feel less safe for having seen the two of you be unfair. So it's a very interesting thing that I don't have to be directly affected by it, but there is a sense of fairness. Now, I should call out here that all of the things that I'm talking about, we all have different levels of them. So some people have a stronger need for fairness and a lower need for autonomy, and somebody else might have a stronger need for security and a lower need for fairness, but we all need a little bit of all of them. And we will need more of some. So there are some people who care less about fairness, but those people will care more about autonomy, security.
Yeah, it makes me think of what Rory Sutherland points out is like perception is king. Your perception of these things are more important than, I guess, actuality or truth, because there is no truth. We are subjective observers, no matter how objective we try to be. And so, I think you were touching on that with the autonomy versus security, right? Like, what is my perception of having autonomy?
Right.
And that's like a trick that we use with our kids. We say, what do you want for your bedtime snack? We don't say, it's time to go to bed.
Right.
It's time to go to bed is implied, but we give them the perception of control.
You give them some autonomy within some structure. Absolutely. Yeah. But if they have no autonomy, if you tell them not just what to do, but how to do it, all of a sudden they push back psychologically. And they start to feel less safe. Their prefrontal cortex shuts down, all of these things. Definitely. All right, so we did security, autonomy, fairness. The next one is E for esteem. Esteem is all about social standing. It's how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive others, what our relationship is with others. From an evolutionary perspective, people that got kicked out of the tribe tended to die. And so we have we're deep wiring to be a part of the tribe, to be a part of what's going on around us. And if we feel that that is threatened in some way, that if I'm not getting the promotion, if I'm being held back, if people don't respect me for my own abilities, that affects my esteem, my social standing, and that makes me feel less safe. Whereas when people respect me and show respect for the kinds of things that I do and where I fit within the organization, where I fit in the social standing, that makes me feel safer. So it's a good one. So then we move around to T, which is trust. Trust, like fairness, is a little bit, it doesn't have to be directly related to me. So we need to feel that there is trust in the environment. So I do need to feel that you trust me, but interestingly, I don't need to feel that I trust you in order to have psychological safety. So it's a little bit unbalanced. It's asymmetrical in that way. But if I believe that you trust me, I feel safer. And if I feel that you don't trust me, then I don't feel safe.
Okay, so the first S is security, and now we've got trust. So yes. How are those similar and how are they dissimilar?
Well, they are interrelated, but security is really all about anticipating and predicting what's going on around us. So it's consistency, it's no surprises, knowing what's going on, understanding the environment. Whereas trust is believing that, somebody that you have trust in me, trust in my abilities, trust that I'll do the right thing. So that it is a relationship between people, whereas the S in security is just, can I predict my environment?
Gotcha. That makes sense.
It really should have been P, but then it wouldn't have spelt the word safety. So I understand what it's So we've got esteem. We had trust. And then the last one, did I get through? S-A-F-T-E. Yes, Y. Y is a catch-all. It's just the word you. So it represents your own personal cognitive biases, your own backgrounds, all of those factors that are unique to you. So there's 5 main things and then this catch-all. because there are things that are different. Our own biases might make us feel safer or less safe in a specific environment. Our own past trauma, for example, might put us into a place where we feel less safe. So there's all kinds of things that are unique to the person. And then there's 5 main groupings that are common to all of us. And that's the safety model in a nutshell. So I like this model because it's actionable. I can look at an environment and I can say, just like I did with a team recently, I came in, I observed some things, and right away I noticed that they were missing some consistency in their environment. They were asking for things that very clearly told me they couldn't predict what was going on around them. They were asking for things from management. I can't get into the specifics, but they were asking for things from management that would make them be able to predict their environment more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've probably all been in those situations where you have maybe more of a laissez-faire type leader, and we're around the time of the year of annual reviews, which most companies still do, unfortunately. And if you have no idea what's coming, it's like torture waiting to be like, am I going to get yelled at? Am I going to get a positive review? Am I get promoted? Am I going to raise? Am I going to get demoted? Like, I have no clue what to expect. And I know many people in that situation, and it is pure torture.
Yep. And that comes into a couple of things. You've got the S of consistency for in the case of performance reviews. You've also got the E for esteem. You have T for trust. Do I trust my manager enough to treat me with respect? Whether or not, I'm going to get the greatest mark that I want, will I be dealt with fairly? Will all these factors come in together into everything? And the more of these things I have, the safer I feel. I might feel I'm not going to get the greatest review in my year end, but I know my boss is going to take care of me anyway. That would make me feel better. Or
Right.
Regardless of where the boss is, I know that I'm awesome this year and I'm going to get a great review. So again, it's all of these things together will get us to a place of psychological safety. But if they're missing, now I'm not operating at my best.
What about like the circumstance where it's like, if I just kind of like keep my head low and do what's given to me and expected of me, then I'll get by.
Mm-hmm.
What configuration of you feel like something like that sits in?
Well, when we're in that state and it's just, I just want to keep my head down, well, then perhaps I'm lacking trust. Perhaps I'm not feeling that there's fairness in the environment. If I feel that I'm doing a great job and I'm not getting recognized for that, then that's absolutely fairness. Esteem for social standing, predictability. If I do these things, am I going to actually be able to get the promotion or the raise or just get an attaboy? You did a good job. So all of these things factor in, and if I'm not feeling it, I don't feel that my social standing is satisfied, or I don't feel that I can predict, I feel less safe. We start to see the behavior that Amy Edmondson was looking for, so I stopped speaking up. But generally, my prefrontal cortex is shut down. So now, when I'm trying to do my best work, and as programmers, our best work requires a lot of heavy analytical work. If my prefrontal cortex is shut down or at least inhibited, I'm not doing my best work. Not even close.
What I love about this, and this is an area that I've definitely dug into myself in recent years, it's how you and I met, Mike, is that, so I spent years like studying Stoicism and how to try to be aware of, but not let your feelings impact you. And I feel like that's something that is kind of like this professional expectation to be really in control of your emotions. And to be professional is to be a blank slate or like a machine. But the reality is that we are emotional creatures and we can't function well in that state. Like our emotions are what affect our ability to perform, to put a few words into your mouth there. And I think that's really fascinating. I think that takes a whole different lens to how we lead people in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, almost every decision we make is emotional, and then we rationalize it later with analytical thought. We come up with really good excuses of why we picked the answer we did, but they're all just excuses.
So one of the things that I'm thinking about is, as Agile coaches, we often have to work in spaces where we don't have a lot of psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do our jobs effectively, it might challenge the status quo, which then reduces the psychological safety before it winds up getting proven out, which then might improve the psychological safety. And so one of the things that I always talk about is the different ways that you can go about creating your own psychological safety. Like, where does that fit in? So I know for me, like, I don't need a whole lot of security. I like autonomy. The F was fairness. I don't always expect a lot of fairness either. Trust is usually kind of low. Now, if I have other Agilists that I'm coaching around, then the total sum of all of our safety I can start to rely upon. But I often talk about the different ways that you can go about existing in that uncomfortable space for longer, just a little bit longer. And let's do it one more time. And let's extend it a bit more this time, right? Because you don't always get it on the first go. You never get it on the first go. But
well, there's things. If I come into a team and I sense that there's not a lot of psychological safety, I will usually start with trust. And I start with trust because it's the easiest one to build up in a team environment. It could be something as simple as we are going to actively work on things together. We're going to do some mob programming, which is a phenomenal tool for building trust. So we might start to do this with the teams and get them working together. We might have them, if we're actually in person, we might do some exercises that are playful. For example, I was at a client last week where they wanted in-person training on a whole bunch of things. So I brought out all the Lego and I brought out all of different things to get people into a playful state, because when we are playful, we tend to feel less fearful. It tends to build up that sense of safety that we have. We have a little bit more predictability in our environment. We're starting to have fun. When we're having fun, we're getting a flood of neurotransmitters in our brain, all the dopamine and endorphins and serotonin and all the rest that are doing a great job of making us feel really good, making us feel more connected to the people around us. We start to feel more comfortable. Our prefrontal cortex is active. We're in a great place. So that's where I tend to start. I'll start with trust. I'll start with playfulness if I can. It's harder to do that sort of thing remotely. It's very easy if I dump a whole bunch of Lego out on the table and I start doing Lego serious play, for example, which, if you're not familiar, is an actual business facilitation technique using Lego bricks. I'm certified in doing that. But I teach technical practices with Lego. I introduce things like the Cynefin model with Lego. So there's all kinds of different things I can do. I might put pipe cleaners on the table because people learn better if their hands are busy. Most people do, not everybody. Most people learn better if their hands are busy. So there's all of these little things that I try to make people feel more comfortable, safer, and the byproduct of that playfulness is that we do feel safer.
Yeah, I feel like Drew, now you can be like, aha, because Drew's the fun, playful coach, and I'm the curmudgeon.
yeah, but it's the environment, right? You've got to influence change to make enough space to try those experiments even. Like, I see a lot where even if you create that safe space, my assumption has always been that the reason why people aren't joining in on that safe spot is usually they'll say, why do we have to do this, right? Why can't I just do my work? And part of me sometimes believes that that's just what they want. Why do we have to shake the tambourine and bang the bongos? Why can't we just do work? But I'd like to think it's really more of a learned reaction where they just don't realize they can be that way. But sometimes people are very serious people.
Well, there is, but when I feel that I'm going to get some resistance to this, I will start off by talking neuroscience. Because anybody who's analytical and this, I am not here for fun, I'm here to be doing a good job, they're usually receptive to listening to a little bit of neuroscience. I'll talk about the fact that my job is to impart a bunch of information to help them learn more effectively. In order for them to learn, they need a hit of dopamine. The easiest way to get dopamine is to have a little bit of fun. So let's do some novelty, let's do some interesting things. If I can get you to laugh, you've just got a hit of dopamine, you're going to remember something. Even if I can get you to smile, you get a small hit of dopamine. But laughter gives a big hit of dopamine, plus serotonin, plus endorphins. Your cortisol levels go down. It's fabulous if we can start to get into that playful state. And I'll start to give a whole bunch of examples like this. Because then people say, oh, okay, I understand. He's not just being playful for the sake of being playful. He's being playful for a purpose. He's doing this because he wants us to learn more effectively. And I keep stressing that. I'm not just doing this for fun. I'm not just doing this for my fun. I'm doing this so that you learn more effectively and you get more out of this experience.
Yeah, I've been reading Humor Seriously, which is all about humor in the workplace, and very similar reasons, right? It gives you the dopamine, and they talk about tips and tricks and, appropriate and not appropriate. But it goes back to that whole, there's like this notion that if you're funny or that humor doesn't have a place in the workplace, but for all the reasons you just said. But there's even more psychological things, like we tend to want to be around and listen to people with a sense of humor more.
Mm-hmm.
We even find them more attractive. And like, there's all of these other reasons why it's good to try to incorporate into your daily life. As the serious curmudgeon, right? As self-proclaimed, it's something that I know I definitely try to work on.
Yeah. And I've had times too that I've just said, no, just leave me alone. I'm here to do work. I don't have time to play the game. But when I explain it all in terms of science, this is the benefit that I'm expecting to get out of this. This is what I'm doing. I find that everybody's willing to at least play along. They may not be fully bought in, but they say, okay, you're here for a purpose. This is not just let's be silly for a little bit. We're trying to do it for a reason. So I'll play along to see if it does work.
And that's actually one of my life hacks for when I have an interview or when I'm about to present, is I will watch or listen to something that makes me smile or laugh.
Mm-hmm.
To get that dopamine hit, to loosen me up, to get the parts of my brain working and going. It's like my own little mini icebreaker for myself. And so I would definitely encourage anyone listening to do the same.
Yeah. So there's a lot of benefit to it. I mean, if I'm still getting resistance, I'll start talking about ego state therapy and how we have all different personalities, and our playful personalities are the most powerful learning ones. So I can dig into all kinds of different things from psychology and from neuroscience, but I don't usually have to go that deep into it. Once I've said dopamine a couple of times and I've said playful approaches and this is what we're intending to do, people are usually saying, oh, okay, he seems to know what he's talking about. I'll believe him for now until we can see. And that's all I ask. I don't expect them to implicitly believe everything I say. I do expect them to suspend disbelief long enough to try it and then see for themselves. And if they feel they didn't get any benefit out of it, then okay, we'll move on. We'll do something different. But I find that they do tend to get benefit out of it, and they're usually asking for more of it once we've done it.
Yeah, I would say it's a balance. Right? Like I've definitely, for myself, but I know for other people, I've definitely gotten feedback where it's like, if you're silly all the time, or if it's playful all the time, and I don't feel like I'm getting the lessons.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's my trap a little bit, is I tend to skew on the silly side, lighthearted side. And I think that makes people uncomfortable a bit. Not everybody, some people.
Yeah, I tend to be very much on the serious side a lot of the time. So when I pull out the Lego, people are saying, oh, this is different for him.
So I want to touch on, you kind of touched on it, Drew. I want to go back a minute when you were talking about an unsafe work environment. And this is something that I've been reflecting a lot, and I'd love to get your ideas on it, Mike, is when we talk about psychological safety, we really tend to think about the individual contributor.
Mm-hmm.
And there tends to be more of them, and they tend to be the people we're coaching the most. But when I start thinking about leadership, and especially the further up we go, the less actual psychological safety they have.
That's often
it's very
true.
Cutthroat. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have this coach or this consultant or this crazy guy that we just hired coming in and challenging my comfort, challenging everything I know, challenging my environment and making things more difficult for me. And now they're having that same biological response that they are potentially inflicting on us and others.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, do you think about that when you're coaching some of the leaders you're coaching? And do you have some tips or tricks to try to comfort these leaders?
Well, it's a lot of the same. I mean, sometimes we can actually get senior leaders to do the games and to be playful in those ways. Not all the time, but I've had senior leaders running billion-dollar businesses that do a ballpoint game with me or do Lego with me. I've done these sorts of things in a playful environment. But again, I'm very clear up front. We're doing this thing not to just have fun. We're doing it to teach a lesson. And at the end, we have to be really crystal clear about the objective and the debrief. Because if you run a senior leader through something playful and you don't have a really serious debrief afterwards, they're going to blow you away from that point on.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. There's more of a requirement to tie it back to concrete actions at the end. But if they can see, okay, these were the lessons, and I get it from the debrief, then they're more likely to try that kind of thing with you again.
See, that's kind of where I was talking about earlier a bit, right? Is the need to create your own psychological safety, right? Like one of the tactics I use is empathy, because what you were just talking about is how senior leadership can usually be under more pressure to perform than others. And by remembering that, that's something that enables me to hold on a little bit longer, or it gives me the space to decide whether or not I want to reframe what it is I've just been told into a more friendly set of words and tone, and just assume that that's how they meant it. And that's okay because they're stressed right now.
Yeah, like emotional intelligence is some of what you're touching on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, the framing, right? Stephen Covey was really big on paradigm shifts. I think framing is so key. And we talked about our mammalian brain. We tend to look at the negatives. It's how we've survived for so long, generation after generation, that we look for the things that are going to hurt us. And people generally have to see 3 to 5 positives for every negative, whether that's feedback or whatever they view as negative in their life, because our brains are skewed towards the negative. But it is something that you can train yourself as well. And if we're talking about the brain, you have the RAS, the reticular activating system, which essentially allows us to focus. Because we have all of our senses going all the time. And so if you hear like your name in a crowd, even with all that noise, that's your RAS looking for that. And so we can train our brains to look for the positives. And that's not to say like you're gaslighting yourself. Those positives are there. We're just not seeing them because we're not used to looking for them, is the difference. And so, Drew, when you're talking about like building your own psychological safety, to me, gratitude is a huge part of it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's acceptance. It's that the reality is I have no choice but to accept the situation for what it is, right? I mean, I do have a choice. I have my own agency. I could quit, and walk out of there. But I've also learned to reframe, and this is what I do a lot in my individual coaching, is help people to realize, especially as Scrum Masters and coaches, that the most important thing that you can learn is how to resolve the threats to psychological safety within your own bubble, and expand that bubble. And that when the squeeze is happening, you just haven't learned yet. Don't have enough experience as a coach yet in trying to figure out ways to problem solve and provide coaching to then reinflate the bubble so that you've got the space there. And so you could choose to leave if you want, but if you stay, you'll be that much better for it, and because you get to take that with you wherever you go in life. So that's what I really focus on a lot of when it comes to psychological safety, especially when I'm talking to other Agilists.
The one thing that makes it easier for people to talk about this is that when I start talking science, neuroscience, psychology, when we're getting into the actual what's going on, because as we all know from a psychological perspective, the moment I can put a name on something, it becomes less scary. And there's an actual phenomenon for it. There's a name for that phenomenon, but I'm drawing a blank on what it is at the moment. But the moment we put a label on something, it becomes easier to understand. So if I feel that I'm in an environment that is very high stress, where people are stressed out all the time, they're not feeling psychologically safe, I will run sessions on how to clear that stuff. So here's some neuroscience hacks to relax your brain, to get you out of that fight or flight response. And I can do all of these little things like if you pick up an object and you pass it from hand to hand. I'm just giving you a quick example. If you pass an object hand to hand, it causes the two hemispheres of your brain to start talking to each other and to start coordinating. Because when you are in a state of high anxiety or stress, the activity in your brain is heavily unbalanced. Your right hemisphere is heavily active. It's lit up like a Christmas tree, if I were to look at it under an MRI. And the left hemisphere is largely idle. And that's what's going on in an anxious state. Well, when I pass an object back and forth using a technique called bilateral stimulation, or sometimes known as EMDR, we are activating the left hemisphere, waking it up so that it can calm down the right hemisphere. And we can bring people down to a calm state. So when I go through and I give a whole bunch of tips, and I've got an hour's worth of tips that I can walk through with a team, and now all of a sudden I've made it acceptable to talk about these things that are going on because I've given labels to them. And the number of times that I have people coming up to me privately after the session, usually grabbing me in the hallway or on a call later, not usually in the session in front of the room, but they'll say, I tried that crazy thing that you showed me and I feel so much better. Now, can we talk about the situation that's going on here? Because I've got this going on in the environment, and that's what's really causing me to stress out. And thank you for the tip to lower my stress, but I've got this problem. Okay, now I put my coaching hat back on, and I say, let me help you through that situation. But we wouldn't even have had that conversation if I hadn't given them some language, if I hadn't made it acceptable to talk about stress and anxiety.
That's like phenomenal. It's so simple, but yet like it's really powerful, and I'm embarrassed to say maybe a little bit mind-blowing. What are, I mean, I don't want you to give away the secrets, or whatnot, but are there other like techniques like that you feel comfortable sharing?
There's an hour's worth of them. I will send you the link to the presentation of me doing that.
Okay,
but I
great.
do this at a lot of my clients. I'll do the same session, but I'll do it for them either in person or online. And I'll walk them through a whole bunch of things like bilateral stimulation, little tricks to activate your vagus nerve that'll calm you down. So for example, if you lift your tongue up to the roof of your mouth and relax your jaw, it triggers the vagus nerve. All of a sudden you start to calm down. Little crazy things like this, they're all neuroscience hacks, and they get you to a better place very quickly. And now that I've given you a bunch of those hacks and I've normalized talking about stress and anxiety, now people are more willing to come and talk to me privately and say, okay, now here's this situation in the workplace that I didn't want to talk to you about before, but I think I can trust you now. Building up the trust in the safety model.
Yeah, and you're helping them first before you ask anything of them as well.
Yes.
Which I think is key. That's something that I see a lot of Scrum Masters struggle with. They're new to a company, they're new to a team, and they come in immediately and they're like, well, the Scrum Guide says this, or the Safe Guide says this. Why aren't we doing this? And they start policing the team before they've had an opportunity to do anything for the team. And so there's no trust, and now you've started your whole interactions with that team on the wrong foot. And we've talked about this in the past. I do like to take a more scientific approach to look for the problem to justify whatever it is they're missing, which goes back to trying to help them with their actual problems. But I do like as well where you're going with this, Mike, where it doesn't have to be maybe as specific to whatever challenge is going on, just being a safe space for them and giving them some tools is enough of a gift. And that even goes with Cialdini's principles of, drawing a blank on it now.
I know the book you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's an I word. I keep wanting to say impression, but...
influence.
Influence. There we go.
Influence.
Wow. His principles of
that
influence.
was actually the very first book on psychology that I ever read.
Oh, wow.
And it was the one that got me started down this long journey.
Very cool. I read that last year. I own the physical copy. I, air quotes, read it on Audible. And it is very long on Audible. It's way longer than the book looks like it should be. So I don't know if there's more content or what. But I had to get
the TARDIS.
Yeah. Yeah. But I had to get a physical copy because there's so much in it. I feel like I need to write a playbook for every consulting sales pitch ever from that book. It's very good stuff. But the principle of reciprocation is where I was going with it, where you're giving. And so now the person feels like they have to give back to you. It's why they give you fortune cookies with your bill at the restaurant, or mints or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. And a lot of times, even if it's like, oh, great, now I have to throw this away because you gave me a brochure or whatever it is, it still activates that part of your subconscious.
Yeah. And probably the worst thing you could do is just come in and announce this is a safe space. And yet I see that all over the place.
So that's where my head has been going. I do a lot of that. I'm realizing, like, as we're talking here, I do a lot of that.
Well, the gotcha is that everybody knows it's not true.
Yeah.
If assuming it's not true. I mean, if it really is a safe space, you didn't need to say it in the first place. And if it's not a safe space and you say that, then everybody's instinctively thinking, oh, he just lied to me. What's the next thing he's going to say that's a lie?
Yeah.
And so those words never come out of my mouth.
I mean, I usually frame it as if you try something and it didn't work out and you adjust your hypothesis, I'll have your back on that. I try to give them, I guess it's not really giving them anything, to let them know that I will have everybody's back.
Well, it's totally cool to say, I am going to do my best to make this a safe space. That's a totally fair statement.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of people coming in and saying, this is a safe space. You can speak freely. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actions speak louder than words. That's also something that I'm very big on. It's why I quit smoking when my kids were born, because my mom smoked my whole life and, threatened me with the fist. I still smoked. It doesn't work. I believe in leading through actions. And it's very much the same in the workplace. You have to show that it's a safe place. You can't just say it. And I see the same trap with autonomy or empowerment. Empowerment's a really popular word in the Agile circle. Well, you're empowered. Well, you can't just say you're empowered and have it be so. Like, they need the ability to do whatever it is they're empowered now to do, and they need the authority. A lot of times leaders even are guilty of that. They say you're empowered, but don't actually give them the authority to be empowered.
Right. Yeah, and this comes back to autonomy again. Do I have the autonomy to make the decisions that I need to make? And maybe I'll start with small things. I'll try something, and if I don't get slapped for it, if my management encourages me, yeah, that was a good thing, try that again, then I'll make a bigger step and a bigger step and a bigger step. And pretty soon I'm doing things that are legitimately risky. But I'm going to take baby steps to get there because I'm always going to anticipate that somebody's going to come along and slap.
Yeah. And one of the things that, one of my favorite stories on this too, that I think challenges kind of our Western, confident madman type glamorous leadership style is Numi. And Drew, you always recall it way better than I do. So I'm going to kind of pitch the ball over to you.
The Numi plant in California. Yeah. Are you familiar with that, Mike?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating story.
Yeah. So I just sum it up real quick for the listeners who might not be, but Toyota was very successful in putting together their production models based on psychological safety. And through that is how they became very successful. The American motor companies wanted to learn more about that. And so they created a co-working space plant, if you will. And it was a massive failure, but it was also a massive success.
It was Toyota and GM, right?
I forget who the American Motor Company was, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember either. But the interesting thing that I found from the Numi plant is that they only brought Japanese management over. They didn't bring any Japanese workers. They had to reuse all of the existing workers from the previous plant. And that plant was the one that had the highest absentee rate, the highest, like all the problems that you might have in a plant. That was the worst plant that whatever company that was, GM or Chrysler or whatever.
Well,
it
not
was
only
the worst
that,
plant they had.
In the parking lots were these encampments, right? Because they wouldn't go home. They would bring RVs and campers into the parking lots and then go home on the weekends. And there were brothels that were formed in these parking lots in the communities and bars. And it was just a real rough crowd of people that was just rowdy, rough, and not afraid to fight for what they believed in, both, verbally and physically.
But they turned it around. It went from being the worst plant to being one of the very best. So it's an astounding case study.
Yeah, and one of the other things that's fascinating for me with the Toyota factories is the andon cord, which I don't know if I think I was told they don't physically have a cord anymore, but essentially, like, picture like a bus stop cord that stops the production line. And the very first thing that the GM, the general manager of the plant, does when he comes over, or whoever the shift lead is they thank the person for an opportunity to learn. They just stopped all production. Most of us in the Western world are like, what is wrong with you? Why would you do that? And we go into kind of like the reprimanding mode. But to them, learning is more important than consistent production. It's, in my mind, more of a systems thinking approach to it. And I forget what plant it was. I want to say Kentucky, where there's a story of the GM that has the town hall and he pulls all the workers together. He's like, people, we have a serious problem. We're learning, I don't know, 25% less, whatever the number was for the story, because they were pulling the andon cord less. And instead of looking at it as we're that much more efficient, it was, we're not learning as much as we used to. And that's such a crazy dynamic for me, in my experience in different companies, to think that they have that level of dedication and safety. And that's the reason why they don't care to share everything about what they do, because they know that nobody's going to replicate it.
Well, that's true now. In the early days, they were very reluctant to share because they thought that they would lose their competitive advantage. It was only later when they did start to share, they realized that nobody else was actually going to do it, which was counterintuitive. They did not expect that. They expected, well, once we've shared this, then the secret's out of the bag and everybody's going to be as good as we are. And that's not at all what happened.
So here's an interesting question that I never really posed before, but are trace elements of that still within the ethos of the American automotive industry? Or did that, after some period of time, just completely dissolve away?
What part? The psychological safety or lack of psychological safety?
Just the ethos of what they learned through Toyota.
I mean,
it's hard to say. I mean, I've worked for 3 different car companies, and I can't talk specifics about what I've seen in any of them. But I don't think the really big lessons got transferred.
Yeah.
I think that's the case for most companies, right? Even companies outside of the automotive industry, I don't think have learned this lesson from Toyota. And I mean, Toyota just had that massive recall that may have been psychological safety influenced as well. So it's kind of a shame to see that they might even be losing some of that. But I think a lot of it goes to kind of the predominant leadership kind of approach, or stigma is the wrong word, notion that we have. I kind of mentioned, like, we tend to romanticize the overconfident leader that has all the answers. And that's the antithesis of a psychological safe leader. That goes back to Welch in the 80s was a huge part of it, in like the neoliberalist kind of movement, where Welch launched what they called the campaign on loyalty. It's the campaign against employee loyalty. And we created this unsafe environment where all that matters is shareholders, and we stack rank people. And I think even if your company isn't that extreme, that has permeated across leadership in all industries.
There are places where it's being done, right? I'm assuming you're familiar with David Marquet's work, his book Turn the Ship Around, and all of his intentional leadership stuff. For those who might be listening to this podcast, if you haven't read Turn the Ship Around, I highly recommend it. It's the story of a nuclear submarine commander who was taught to be the authority on the ship. And at the last minute, they put him on a type of ship that he knew nothing about. And so he was forced to learn rapidly from everyone else because he had been taught to be the expert that knew everything. And all of a sudden, he's on this sub where he knows nothing. And it's a fascinating story that has incredible leadership lessons to come from it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think the other thing to remember is humans aren't one thing or another. We're way too complicated for that. And so a leader can do something that is very aspirational in something like psychological safety or other desirable leadership qualities, and do something completely opposite the next day. And someone that I think of with that is Elon Musk. And I'm not going to go into any political things with it, but Elon Musk, I always think of the story, one of the first times that SpaceX launched and the rocket blew up in front of everyone. There was reporters there was a crowd, everyone's watching. They had slaved for, I don't know, probably years. Millions of dollars up in the air, explodes. He ignores everyone. He ignores the press, he ignores the crowd. He walks over to his crew and he says, I want you all to be proud. You've done something great today. You've done something that nobody else has done. And he picks them up in their time of need. And that was like such a powerful story to me of such an amazing leadership quality thing that I would say we don't tend to hear about anymore. The guy that's slashing employment across Twitter, across government agencies, you're not seeing that same thing. And so, when we talk about companies either having it or don't, I feel like we're not that polarized, or we're not that binary. Right? Some areas of companies have it and some don't.
You got me thinking, right, as you were talking about that. Have you ever seen, it's maybe like 10 years ago, I haven't seen too much of this lately in the news, but 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, when companies were really starting to explore bipedal robotics, and they'd bring it on the stage at some major conference, and the thing would just fall over and go haywire, and there was a team waiting backstage to bring out the black curtain so that nobody could see the mistake. And that kind of goes against the grain because it does solidify you made a mistake, right? We have to hide this thing that you guys did, we have to hide, as opposed to somebody coming out there and celebrating the upshot. Like the fact that we as a company even were able to be on the stage today and have an audience this large to show our, I think it was the IBO, it was a lot of it, but like that's something to celebrate.
Yeah, I think of Musk again with the Cybertruck when he breaks the window on stage and he just rolls with the punches and makes a joke about it, is very different and a very different side of Musk, the leader we see today. And yeah, I do think when we talk about trust and many of these other things, it's being able to acknowledge mistakes happen. I'm sure many people have said it, but I automatically go to Henry Ford's. I'm going to paraphrase essentially like the only mistake is one that we don't learn from. Mm-hmm. Speaking of polarizing leaders.
So I feel like we drifted off topic, right? How do we want to bring it back?
Not quite sure. I mean, there's so much to it. I do like to start the conversation from a science perspective because, fundamentally it's know your audience, right? And I tend to be presenting to IT people, and IT people tend to at least think of themselves as being logical and rational, even when we're perhaps not as logical and rational as we'd like to be. And so starting with hard science is a great conversation point, and then we can build into, well, now that you understand this, how are you feeling about things like that? So it's know your audience.
One of the challenges I see with something like that is people are so busy that it's hard to even get them to pause to think or to listen to the message or to join your workshop or whatever it is. Is that something that you have a silver bullet for as well?
No, I do try to time box things. So if I'm trying to put together, if I want to do mob programming, for example, with a team for the first time, I'll tell them up front, it's going to be 2 days. But at the end of the 2 days, if you decide you don't want to do this again, I'll never ask you again. So I'm putting a time box on it, and people say, I can put up with anything for 2 days. If this will get him off my back, I'll do it for 2 days. And then at the end of 2 days, they're asking for a third. So I try to time box all these things. I'm only going to take an hour, and I'm going to talk about neuroscience of psychological safety, or I'm going to give you some tips to deal with anxiety. And it's only an hour. And if you decide you don't like any of it, well, then you've only lost an hour. So time boxing it for me has been a very effective strategy.
You're right, actually. Now I'm thinking about it. I wasn't so sure if I was sold on it when he first said it, but being remote definitely is a challenge because There are really small things you can do that are passive in person that you can't really, like the story I always tell Brad about, all the Scrum teams had a little like idol, like a plushie or a toy or something that related to their team name. And during stand up in the morning, they would pass that around to popcorn, who got to speak in what order. Like that's something that would be very easy to just kind of like sneak in under the radar, where people feel like that's the fun thing that they're more likely to accept, and it takes no time out of their day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're also making me think of your security when you're explaining that and how people want to know. That's like a UX thing as well, where people would rather wait longer but know how long they have to wait than not know how long the wait is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole perceived performance being more important than actual performance.
Yeah, and I like that as well when it comes to asking your experiment. Sometimes I'm very generic with it. And I'm like, hey, let's just try this. And if we don't like it, we can always change it. But being, I think, more precise with the time box maybe creates more of that comfort of let's try it for a day, let's try it for 2 days, let's try it for a sprint.
I do that when we're coming out of retrospectives. I'm very deliberate about that. So I'll say, I'm not asking you to pick the new way we're doing forever. I'm asking you for something you're going to try for the next 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, we're going to stop and reflect. Did we actually like that thing or not? If we don't, then we're going to stop it. And all of a sudden, you can see the visible relief from a lot of people where they say, oh, now it's a much easier decision because I'm only deciding for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if I'm picking the new way that we're going to do for months, it better be right.
Yeah. For the rest of my life, I'm now committing to this.
Yeah. No, what are you going to try for 2 weeks? And, even if you get a week in and you say, this is stupid, we'll stop.
Yeah, I love it.
Which requires the trust that actually is going to happen. I feel like so many people have experienced so many times where somebody said, let's just try this out. And that just becomes the default.
Yes.
Yeah.
We must have that trust. We have the backing of our team that gives us esteem. We've got autonomy because we made some decisions on our own. We've got some consistency because now we know what's going to be happening over the next 2 weeks. So all of those things are building up towards psych safety.
Remembering to go back and check in, I think, is just as important, though, because that's also something that I would totally forget. Like, my trick is I add a notification on my calendar to remind myself, hey, this thing that you started, make sure to go back. And that's part of building the trust. Oh, he said that we'll only do this for 2 weeks and we'll look at it. Here he is.
Right. So when in the context of a retro, the first step in the retro is we're going to review what we said we were going to do last time. Did we actually do those things? If we did they make us better or worse? If we didn't, let's talk about why we didn't.
The degree of the lack of psychological safety in some of the companies that I worked for is just astounding. You just don't even know where to start sometimes.
Yeah, but if we can at least get people talking about it, then already we're much further ahead than we were. Because a lot of times that psychological safety or lack of it is just bubbling under the surface. And you know it's going to cause problems, but you don't know where it's going to burst up. If we can start to talk about it in a controlled environment, if we can give some labels to it so that people understand, oh, the piece we're missing here is this. We're missing trust. Well, now there's something actionable we can do about that. There's all kinds of activities we can do to build trust. Something like fairness would be a tougher thing. If I perceive that there's unfairness in the environment, that may be a tougher problem to solve than just building a little bit of trust, but it's the same thing. So having those conversations, putting labels on things, allowing us to talk rationally about things. And if it's too difficult to talk about, can we do something playful to try and get them to a better place? And this is where I would pull out the Lego. I could hit 2 things with one stone if I'm in person and I can do a retrospective with Lego Serious Play. I've made it playful and I've allowed us to talk about a difficult thing.
And Lego Series Play is the coaching with Legos thing you were talking about that you're trained in?
Yeah, it's an actual business facilitation technique created by the Lego Group. They brought in a whole bunch of people out of universities and said, we want to do something. I think ultimately the goal was we want to sell more Lego, but they said we want to do something around actual business facilitation. So we want to do a useful thing for adults. This is not for kids.
Mm-hmm.
We want to do a thing for adults to help them bring out the playful side and do all that. And so they did all of this research, and they came up with an actual specific facilitation technique. And there's different kinds of kits you can get. I tend to use the small kit, which is 62 very specific pieces that each person gets. And then we do a bunch of builds. We talk about the builds. It leverages all kinds of psychological effects. So I can talk about the fact that my minifigure down here that I've built has problems with this other minifigure over here. And now I can talk about conflict without ever recognizing that I'm having a conflict with Brad. I never have to say that out loud, but because this minifigure is having a conflict with that minifigure, we can talk about it logically and rationally without letting emotions flow into it. So it's a great, great technique.
I feel like a great activity would be to just take like a long, like 2x6 brick and put that smooth brick on top of it and put it together and throw it in the center of the room and say, whoever can pull this apart without causing their fingers to bleed.
There is so much that we can do with Lego and good debrief, but you don't even need Lego. I happen to like that because it brings out a really good playful side, but you can do something like a 6 thinking hats that allows you to very thinly slice your perspective and look at things in a different way. If I'm dealing with a retrospective where I'm concerned about there being conflict, and I get pulled into a lot of these, people will tap me as the local coach and say, okay, well, I've got a retro coming up where I expect people to be shouting at each other. Can you facilitate that one? Because I don't feel comfortable doing that one. And so when that happens, I bring in a 6 thinking hats retro because we can totally piece apart all of the emotion and start to have a logical conversation.
That makes me think of nonviolent communication, where it's if you can understand the other person's point of view, you can almost always come to a resolution within half an hour. And so it sounds like you're essentially facilitating that through inanimate objects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of psychological effects that we're leveraging there, but you don't need to understand all the psychology behind it. Lego Serious Play is very definitely a follow these steps and you'll get these results type program. But it was later when I started studying neuroscience and started studying psychology and getting into hypnosis and getting into body language and all this stuff that I started to realize, oh, now I understand why the Lego works. I never understood why. I just knew that if I did these things, I get these results. But as I started to go deeper and deeper into all of how the brain works, it was, oh, now I get it. I understand what was happening when I did this.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make too. We don't always have to understand everything behind what we do. I do think it helps validate that we're on the right track. But I use stuff all the time that I don't really know how it works, and I'm okay with that.
I feel like I would disappoint our listeners if I didn't go back like a minute to ask you, do you use hypnosis in a professional setting or is it just a hobby?
I do. I am a trained hypnotist. I've been studying it for about 9 years now. And so, yes, if somebody explicitly asks me, will you work on me with something or other, will you put me into a trance and do whatever, I'm happy to do that. But generally speaking, hypnosis is so many different layers. It's not what you see in movies. Well, there's a tiny bit of truth in there. There's always a kernel of truth, but it's not really what you see in movies. But all the language that we're using, we are hypnotizing people around us and being hypnotized by them on a regular basis. So when you get up and you give a presentation or you facilitate a session, you are putting people in and out of trance. They are doing the same to you. It's happening all the time. The difference between you and me is that I know what I'm doing. I'm doing it deliberately and consciously. But you are also using hypnosis all the time. You just don't know it.
It's interesting. I could buy into that.
Yeah, there's fascinating stuff on it too. I was telling Mike the last time we spoke that I had recently read a book on it as a part of getting into neuroscience as well, and I'm definitely not practicing or anything. It's fascinating though.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the hypnosis community is large, and there's some people that are very much on the spiritual side, but the people that I study with tend to be very hardcore science types. So let's talk about what's actually going on in the brain. Let's dig in. So much of what I've learned about neuroscience has been through the hypnosis community. Let's find out what's really going on. These are the nodes that are lighting up. This is the biology that's happening. This is what's going on. Like these little hacks of bilateral stimulation. I learned all of that in a hypnosis course. This is all stuff that it is all ultimately hypnosis. But it's not what you think of when you think of hypnosis, because you're thinking you're getting sleepy now. I'm going to wave the pendulum and I'm going to leave all kinds. I'm happy to do that with somebody if they ask me for it, but I'm not deliberately doing that. But everything else, I'm going to show you this technique. It's hypnosis. It's going to put you in a better state, relieve some of that anxiety. Let's talk about that. It's language patterns. How can we have better and deeper conversations? Well, a little bit of hypnotic language here and there to get people in a better state. If you've heard of clean language, that's all hypnotic language. Agile coaches use that extensively. Just most of them don't know that that's what they're doing.
I'm not familiar with clean language. What is that?
It's a very specific language pattern. I don't know how much time we have here, but in a nutshell, if you come to me and you say, I feel like I've been thrown under the bus, and I say back, how do you feel that you were sideswiped today? Your brain is now going back and saying, did he say the same thing that I did? Is it a different thing? I'm not quite sure. I'm all over the place, but you've lost your concentration. I've broken the mood. But if instead you say, I feel I was thrown under the bus today, and I say, what kind of a bus was that? Or what kind of being thrown under a bus was that? Or tell me more about being thrown under the bus. Those are clean language questions because they don't contaminate your language. They don't contaminate the metaphors that you used. They allow you to unpack your own thinking in a much easier way than if I had come in with clumsy questions and tried to rephrase it and change it all around. So this is clean language. It comes out of therapy. It's been used on some really severe therapy situations, but it's also really highly useful in coaching. And so we could spend a whole time just talking about clean language.
Very interesting.
But it is, again, it's a fascinating thing that also comes out of the hypnosis world. It was a hypnotherapist that first created that.
Very cool. Well, now that you've successfully hypnotized us and all of our listeners, this has been a great episode. So thank you very much, Mike, for joining us today. A pleasure as always.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to going and checking out your website because I feel like there's things that I've been doing that I don't really understand the science behind it at all. And through some of the discussions today, I found it really was thought-provoking. So I really appreciate this. This is a great conversation.